Grief, it's such a universal human thing, isn't it? That really deep feeling we get when a connection breaks.
Yeah, a significant bond. Could be with a person, obviously, but, maybe a place too. Or even an idea.
Right, or a pet, or an object. So today, responding to requests we've gotten, we're doing a deep dive into grief, all its different sides.
And our guide here is Grieving for Dummies, which, despite the name, actually offers some really rich insights.
It really does. And what's interesting is how it goes beyond just the emotional side, right?
Totally. It shows how grief really kind of sinks into everything. Your body, your social life, even like your sense of meaning, your spirit.
Exactly. So our mission today is to pull out the key stuff for understanding grief for yourself, or maybe if you're supporting someone else.
And hopefully do it in a way that's helpful, not overwhelming.
Yeah. The book covers so much: losing parents, kids, partners, friends, pets, all sorts of loss. And grief looks different every time.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly are grief and loss, according to this source?
Okay, so grief is basically the feelings that come up because of a loss.
And loss is the actual breaking of that bond, that connection you had with something significant.
Significance is the key word there.
Definitely. It's the meaning of that connection that drives the grief.
So the stronger the bond, the more important the person or thing was, the deeper the grief.
Precisely. Even when they're gone, their importance doesn't just vanish. Sometimes it feels even stronger.
Like a spotlight on the empty space. Now, the book also says something interesting about how we as a society deal with grief, or rather how we don't deal with it very well.
Yeah, it suggests we're actually kind of inept at it.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, one argument the source makes is about our focus. Modern society pushes cognitive skills, right? Thinking, problem solving, achieving things.
We get loads of training for that.
Exactly. But very little, if any, training on handling tough emotions, on processing loss.
So we're sort of left hanging when grief hits?
Pretty much. We don't have good maps for it. And that lack of societal fluency, it has real effects on people grieving.
Oh, so?
Well, because we don't talk about it openly, people lack reference points. They don't know if what they're feeling is normal. So they see others maybe seeming okay, or they feel pressure to get over it, and they start questioning themselves. Am I doing this wrong?
Adding worry on top of the pain.
Yeah, it's like the grief itself, plus this extra burden of feeling like you're failing at grieving.
So it's the loss, and then this uncertainty about whether your grief is even okay.
Okay, let's dig into some other factors, societal, personal, that make grieving even harder.
Right. The book mentions a few key things. One is just the competitive nature of life today.
Yeah.
There's this pressure to bounce back fast.
Patience, almost.
Yeah, impatience with the whole process. Then there's just plain ignorance about what grief actually involves, often tied to that discomfort with emotions we mentioned.
And the big one, the taboo around death itself. Exactly. And finally, that very personal struggle trying to find some kind of meaning in the loss. That could be a huge hurdle.
That pressure to be strong, the awkwardness around death. Yeah, that sounds incredibly isolating for someone going through it. What about fear? Our own fear of loss and death?
Oh, it's huge. The source links our fear of loss directly to our, fundamental fear of dying.
We kind of live like we've got forever, don't we?
We often do. Focusing on stuff, achievements, things we can't take with us. So when loss actually happens, it's jarring. Because we've been avoiding thinking about mortality.
That denial of our own time being limited. The book mentioned an exercise from Mazumi Roshi.
Yeah, he was a big figure in Zen Buddhism in the West. He suggested really engaging with death by defining it for yourself in your own words.
Instead of using softer terms.
Right, like passed on or lost. Those terms can create distance. Defining it makes it less abstract, less of this background fear.
Bringing it into the light so it has less power.
That's interesting.
Okay, what about faith? Does having strong religious beliefs make grief easier, less intense?
The book suggests it's more nuanced than that. Faith doesn't really act like a painkiller for grief. The raw emotion is still there.
But it provides something else.
It can provide a framework, a context for understanding the loss, maybe finding meaning within a larger worldview. It offers rituals, community, a sense of connection.
So it helps you carry the grief maybe, but doesn't take it away.
Exactly. It doesn't let you skip the work of grieving. It's more about integrating the loss into your understanding of life and death.
That makes sense. It's a container, not an escape route. And the book brings up the Book of Job regarding suffering.
Yeah, just briefly, to counter that old idea that suffering is always, punishment for doing something wrong.
Job suffers despite being righteous.
Right. It challenges that simple cause and effect idea about suffering and divine will. It suggests a more direct, maybe more complex relationship with the divine is needed.
Important point. Suffering isn't necessarily your fault. Okay, let's shift gears. How does the way someone dies affect the grief? A sudden death versus one you saw coming must feel totally different.
Absolutely. The source really digs into this. Let's start with anticipated deaths, like from a long illness.
That must be so draining, watching someone decline.
It is. The book talks about the layers of stress. There's the emotional pain of watching them suffer, the practical side of caregiving, and then this thing called anticipatory grief, feeling the sorrow, the fear, maybe even pulling away a bit before they actually die.
And maybe feeling guilty, helpless.
Yes, guilt is common. Feeling you're not doing enough or you can't stop their pain. It's complex.
And hospice care is highlighted as a big help here.
Huge. For pain management, practical support, emotional, spiritual help for the whole family, and bereavement support afterwards too.
But there's a catch.
Yeah, the source says people often wait too long to enroll. They miss out on weeks, maybe months of valuable support and comfort.
It's hard to make that shift, I guess, from fighting it to focusing on comfort. Okay, what about the flip side? Sudden, unexpected deaths.
With those, a really common thing is guilt. Lots of what-if thinking.
Even if it makes no sense.
Even if it's totally illogical. Replaying events, looking for something, anything they could have done differently. The book says it's a natural first reaction, trying to make sense of chaos, find some control.
But it can get stuck.
Yeah, if it turns into constant rumination, it can block the grieving process.
That if-only feeling. So powerful. What about suicide? That seems like it would add extra layers of pain.
It often does. The source calls it a potential triple whammy. The grief itself, plus often stigma, shame, maybe social or religious disapproval.
That's incredibly tough.
It is. The book notes differences too, like suicide with a terminal illness versus a young person's suicide. And it warns that some suicide warning signs can look like normal grief signs.
Just be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Right, and try to focus on the person's life, their qualities, not just the tragic end.
Remember the whole person.
Okay.
Death from physical assault. Another incredibly hard one.
Yeah. In those cases, the book says a crucial early step is often about justice. Finding the person responsible, holding them accountable.
So closure might actually apply here, in a limited way.
Possibly. Getting answers, seeing justice done, can be necessary before the grieving can really take hold.
Right.
Addressing that fundamental injustice.
Right. And finally, accidental deaths, like in natural disasters.
Those bring unique challenges. Often there's no one specific to blame, which is frustrating.
Right.
It can lead to helplessness, a struggle for meaning.
And maybe a crisis of faith.
For some, yes, grappling with why such a thing would happen. Again, the book cautions against easy answers about, God's plan.
Yeah.
It's more complex.
That struggle with randomness. Okay, let's move into the specific relationships. Losing parents, how does the book frame that?
It talks about the dual role parents have. Nurturing us, providing security, but also helping us grow up, become independent.
And if they didn't do one of those well?
That can really shape the grief. Maybe highlighting what was missing or bringing up old issues.
And it mentions feeling orphaned, even as an adult.
Yeah, it broadens that idea. It's about losing that primary layer of protection and support they ideally provide, no matter your age.
Makes sense. And it says grandparents are often our first experience with grief.
Often, yeah. Those early losses can kind of shape how we understand grief later on.
How does losing a parent differ for a child versus an adult?
Well, for a child, it's woven into their development, isn't it? They face milestones without that parent. It shapes who they become.
Right.
For an adult, it can shake up sibling relationships. Old dynamics might surface. It can affect their marriage, too, maybe leaning more on their spouse.
And what about losing a parent who was difficult, absent, or abusive?
That's a very different kind of grief. Often really complex, maybe relief mixed with guilt or unresolved anger. It's confusing.
Definitely not straightforward. And the surviving parent.
They're grieving a partner, of course. Adult children often step up with support, practical, emotional, but the book stresses respecting the surviving parent's independence while helping.
A tricky balance. Supporting their grief as a spouse while dealing with your own grief as their child.
Exactly. It's a real juggling act.
Okay, partners and spouses. This is described as one of the biggest losses.
Absolutely. Losing that person you shared your life with.
Yeah.
The book looks at the impact on, well, everything. Spiritual, practical.
Your daily life turned upside down. It mentions psychological, practical, and sensual challenges.
Yes. Psychologically, the immense pain, loneliness, having to figure out who you are now as just me instead of us. Practically money changes, social circles shift, managing the house alone, essentially the loss of intimacy, touch, just their physical presence. That's huge.
I'm feeling like a third wheel.
Yeah, that social awkwardness and things you used to do together suddenly feel hard or empty.
That feeling, that part of you died too.
Yeah.
And it mentions financial risks for unmarried partners.
Crucial point. Without marriage or legal partnership, accessing assets, inheritance, it can be a nightmare.
So estate planning is vital.
Absolutely. Wills, living trusts essential for unmarried couples to protect the surviving partner.
Good practical advice. Okay, siblings. The book calls this disenfranchised grief.
Yeah, meaning it's often overlooked. Society, even families, might focus more on the parents' or spouse's grief.
And the siblings themselves might downplay it.
Sometimes, especially if they were young when it happened. And the specific relationship, close, rivalrous, whatever, really colors the grief. Birth order, shared history, all that.
So much depends on that unique bond. What about kids grieving a sibling?
They can feel intense guilt, maybe resentment if the lost sibling needed a lot of care, confusion, and long-term effects are possible.
Like the haunted child.
Yeah, who never really processed it. Or the overprotected child whose parents become super anxious. And losing a twin is unique, like losing part of yourself.
That identity connection must be so strong. Okay, moving to perhaps the hardest loss, death of a child.
The source stresses parental guilt here. It's incredibly common, often intense, even when parents couldn't have changed anything.
It goes against the natural order of things.
Exactly. And the grief is different depending on the stage.
Yeah.
Loss of fertility, prenatal loss. The book mentions a Buddhist ceremony, Mizuko Jizo, for that. Then infant death, toddler, teenager.
Suicide in teens brings extra pain.
Yes, huge stigma. And even losing an adult child, that sense of lost potential, lost future.
Each stage, a different kind of heartbreak. And how does it affect the parents' relationship?
It puts enormous strain on it. Even strong couples can struggle because people grieve so differently at different speeds.
Misunderstandings happen easily.
Very easily. And it's often the biggest loss either has ever faced. So they can feel isolated even from each other.
A shared tragedy that can pull people apart, sadly. What about friends? The family we choose.
The source really validates this. Friends offer unique support, love. Losing a close friend can hurt just as much as losing family.
But it might not be acknowledged as much.
Often not. Another kind of disenfranchised grief, reaching out to the family, mutual friends, sharing that grief that's important.
Finding that shared validation. Okay, finally, pets. Truly part of the family for so many.
And the book absolutely affirms that grief. It's real, it's profound.
That special bond.
Yeah, unconditional love often. Their shorter lives mean we face it more often. And euthanasia is such a hard decision, bringing its own guilt.
And society doesn't always get it.
No. That lack of understanding can make it even lonelier.
Okay, so we've looked at different losses. Now, how do you actually navigate this? Where do you even start?
First things first, initial crisis management.
Yeah.
The book stresses self-care. Physically, emotionally, just basic needs.
It's okay if you can't concentrate.
Totally normal. And temporary. Big warning. Don't use drugs or alcohol to cope. Bad idea.
So take it one step at a time. Delegate.
Exactly. Break it down. Ask for help. Just focus on getting through the immediate moment.
And then, over time, the focus shifts.
Yeah. Gradually, it moves from just the pain of the loss towards remembering the person, appreciating them, figuring out how to carry their memory forward.
Integrating them into your life, but in a new way. What about needing people versus needing to be alone? That back and forth.
The book says that's totally normal, that push-pull. Sometimes you need comfort, connection. Other times, quiet reflection.
And both are okay.
Both are necessary. Honor what you need when you need it. Opening up is therapeutic, but only when you feel ready.
Respecting your own rhythm. Now, the famous stages of grief, denial, anger, etc. The book mentions them, but says they're not linear.
Right. More like common experiences, not steps you must follow in order. Denial might be disbelief or just forgetting for a moment.
Anger can go in many directions.
At unfairness, at the person who died, at yourself. Bargaining is the what-ifs, the regrets, sadness, apathy. That's in there too.
And acceptance isn't about liking it.
No, it's about acknowledging the reality, adjusting. The book also mentions Dr. Rando's idea needing to let go of old assumptions about the world, the old assumptive world.
To make space for the new reality. So it's a map, not a rigid path. What about when grief gets stuck, becomes troubled or complicated?
Yeah, that's different from typical grief. Traumatic loss, violent, Sudden can lead to prolonged denial, avoidance, even PTSD symptoms.
And grief after abuse is complex too.
Very. Mixed feelings, pain, relief, guilt. Also, really dependent relationships can lead to complicated grief.
How do people avoid grieving?
Staying frantically busy, refusing to admit it's real, numbing out with substances. Lots of ways.
But avoidance doesn't really work long term.
No, it usually hinders healing. The book suggests ways to reconnect with the grief, like retelling the story or using creative expression.
Facing it, basically. Okay, how can we help someone who's grieving? It feels so hard to know what to do.
The most powerful thing, active listening. Really listening, without judging, without trying to fix it. Just being present with their pain.
Empathy, even if you haven't had the same loss.
Exactly. It's about connecting to their feelings. And remember, everyone's grief is shaped by so many things. The relationship, how they died, past losses, personality, culture.
So be patient. Let them feel whatever they feel.
Absolutely. Be available, be patient, let them express everything, even contradictory feelings or old grief resurfacing.
Don't try to rush them. The book gives concrete tips too, right?
Yes, really practical stuff. Acknowledge the loss, just say something. Be there consistently, listen well, offer practical help meals, errands.
Help with the paperwork stuff.
Yeah, that can be overwhelming. Don't avoid saying the person's name. Don't change the subject if they bring it up. Understand, it takes time, it's messy.
Encourage help if needed.
Yes, if you're worried. And most importantly, let them grieve their own way.
Such good, actionable advice. Okay, what about expressing your own grief? Moving towards healing.
The advice is to go through the pain, not around it. And it mentions STUGs, sudden temporary upsurges of grief.
Those waves that hit you later.
Yeah, totally normal. It outlines ways to express grief. Talking it out, showing it outwardly, sharing stories, or using symbols and rituals.
Creating personal rituals sounds helpful.
Very. Or creative outlets, writing, art, music, ways to process and release the emotions.
Finding your own way to let it out and keep the connection. Now, the physical side often ignored.
But so real. Grief shows up in the body. Sadness, anger, anxiety, apathy, they have physical effects.
Like loss of appetite, trouble sleeping.
Yeah, poor concentration, memory issues, fatigue, listlessness, all common.
So what helps physically?
The book suggests soothing things like massage self or professional, deep breathing, meditation.
Movement therapy.
Yes, things like Feldenkrais, Alexander Technique, yoga, Tai Chi, martial arts. They help release tension stored in the body.
And just regular exercise.
Definitely. Cardio, strength training, being in nature. It gives respite, releases energy. Also mentioned briefly. Aromatherapy, acupressure.
It's a whole body experience, grief, need to care for the body too. What about special days, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries? Those firsts are brutal.
They really amplify the loss, don't they? Because they're packed with memories. The advice is face them head on.
Don't pretend they aren't happening.
Right, acknowledge them. Remember, honor the person, but you don't have to enjoy them like before. Maybe just aim to commemorate or just get through it.
Be kind to yourself on those days. The book gives examples for different holidays.
Yeah, specific ideas for navigating Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, anniversaries, finding ways that feel right for you now.
Acknowledging the day and the absence. Okay, the spiritual side. Grief often triggers big questions.
For sure. It can be a really intense spiritual journey, testing your beliefs. The book contrasts secular views with how central death is in most religions.
It summarizes different traditions.
Yeah. Overviews of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Their views on life, death, afterlife, mourning rituals.
Different cultural approaches, too.
Mentions Chinese ancestor veneration, Hispanic Day of the Dead celebrations, and even newer secular paths like deep ecology or Taoism, seeing death as natural transformation.
So many different ways to find meaning or context. How about integrating the loss, making it part of your ongoing life?
Often involves things like grief dreams, which might feel reassuring but usually fade. The focus is on nurturing your own inner connection.
Through memories, talking to them inwardly.
Exactly. Rather than relying on external things like mediums, the key idea is reaching a new normal, not going back to the past.
Grief changes you.
It really does. But that change can bring growth, new perspectives, more empathy, deeper appreciation for life sometimes.
Yeah. Finding a way for them to still be part of your story and commemorating them helps with that.
Definitely. Keeps the love alive. Lots of ideas. Photo albums, telling stories, grave markers, planting trees, virtual memorials.
Gathering for services.
Yes, sharing grief and celebrating their life, or doing community service for causes they cared about. actively keeping their memory present.
Intentional remembering. Now, the book finishes with some very direct lists. Things not to say. Cliches.
Oh yeah, the top 10 things to avoid. Time heals all wounds. Be strong. They're in a better place.
God needed an angel.
Oof, yes. Everything happens for a reason. You'll get over it. Move on. All those things that sound helpful, but often feel dismissive.
Because they shut down the person's actual feelings?
Exactly. They invalidate the unique pain. So, in contrast, the book lists the top 10 ways to actually help.
Which we touched on earlier.
Right. Acknowledge the loss. Be present. Listen patiently. Offer practical help. Use their name. Don't change the subject. Understand it takes time. Encourage professional help if needed. Let them grieve their way.
Simple, genuine support. And it lists resources too. Online help.
Yes, specific websites and organizations, like the Compassionate Friends, Hospice Net, resources for pet loss, for teens.
And meditations.
10 specific meditations focused on grief. Guided imagery, compassion practice, transforming pain. Practical tools.
Wow, okay, so a lot covered there. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway, the core message?
I think it's that grief it's complex, it's messy, it hits every part of us, emotional, physical, social, spiritual, and it's incredibly personal.
So kindness to yourself is key.
Absolutely. Self-compassion, getting support when you need it, and just allowing the process to happen without judging it or rushing it.
That's a really good summary. Okay, a final thought for you, our listener. Think about which aspect of grief we discussed today. Maybe the emotional side, the physical, the social, the spiritual. Or how the loss happened, which one resonates most with you or your experience. Perhaps that's an area you could explore a bit more, find some resources or practices around.
Good reflection point.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into grief. We really hope it offered some useful perspectives, and please keep sending us your ideas for future topics.